Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. We're going to have a really good time tonight. I've got a superb guest. This fellow really knows his stuff and has been on some pretty impressive shows, knows some really high-level people in the spiritual community. You're going to enjoy him. I'll tell you more about him shortly. I want to talk with you a bit about the Spiritual Broadcasting Network and about the Spiritual But Not Religious show. You know, the Spiritual But Not Religious community really is almost an anonymous community as far as having a voice. And as I understand it, as many as one-fifth of the population of the United States declares himself as spiritual but not religious. Now, that's a huge amount of people to not have a voice. And it's a very diverse group. Most don't go to church. Some, of course, do, but most don't. And really look toward a personal experience of a higher power. So they have strongly held beliefs of a higher power. And so the purpose of the Spiritual Broadcasting Network and this show is to bring you the many diverse voices of that spiritual community and to gain or garner a voice for our community. If we're going to bring about any real changes, and it looks like, you know, in a couple of years, or not even a couple of years now, we're coming up on 2012, if there's going to be any transformation, we're going to need to come together and become the force that I believe that we already are. And so that's our purpose. My guest tonight is John J. Harper. John is the author of Tranceformers, Shamans of the 21st Century. Listen, this guy is a former Defense Department scientist, and he's a clinical hypnotherapist. Got a really strong, powerful background in all this. We're going to talk tonight about earth changes in 2012. We're going to talk about shamanism, near-death experiences. There's no lack of things to talk about. I think our biggest problem is going to be able to get it confined into, you know, something that we can really sink our teeth into here. Tom, have we got John on the phone?
Yes, we do.
Good evening, John.
Good evening.
Hey, I've been looking forward to talking with you. I've read your book. Your book is a really powerful book for our audience. It's the Tranceformers, Shamans of the 21st Century. Man, this is jam-packed with all kinds of good information. I really recommend that you pick this book up. John, you've been doing this kind of thing for a pretty long time, haven't you? Somewhere 20, 25 years, 23, 24, somewhere in there?
Yeah, George, I started researching for the book in the late 1980s after I had this after-death communication that I opened the book with of my friend George Vigay, and actually started giving radio interviews in 1993 in December in Seattle, so this is almost a milestone, about 17 years now.
Wow, yeah, very powerful. And you've been on a ton of shows. You were with Coast to Coast on George Norrie. You were a guest you were frequently a guest there, I understand.
Yes, Art Bell, Ian Punnett, and George Norrie all interviewed me on various occasions, and I think we ended up doing about a half a dozen shows together, and it was a wonderful experience. And but yeah, I like to do the smaller interviews too. I think it's more intimate, and I know the audiences appreciate it too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So before we get started with talk about your book and about, I've got a whole lot of things I'd like to talk with you. I want to do a couple things. One, I want to find out how you're connected to the mind and body works. That's a very interesting concept.
Yes, actually about a year ago on Facebook, and I want to say good evening to all my Facebook friends. We have a great time on Facebook, and I hope some of our listeners will join me if they're not already on our list of friends. But the Mind and Body Works in Durango, Colorado is what George and I are referring to.
Right.
This is a clinic that is implementing a new cutting-edge therapy. It's an amino acid therapy, And what that means specifically is these are the substances that control our nervous system. These are the neurotransmitters, the precursors to the neurotransmitters in our brain and central nervous system. Actually, they're throughout the whole body. They can be found in the gut and the blood and the lungs and so on. But
Right.
This is the work of Candace Pert, biochemist Dr. Candace Pert, who wrote a wonderful book called Molecules of Emotion, Why You Feel the Way You Feel. Is kind of the standard book for the layperson. But what got me there, George, in Durango, Colorado, back in mid-September of this year, so about 2 months ago, I had a relapse of a spinal cord injury in my neck. In fact, originally my neck was injured in Florida in a very severe rollover car accident when I was in the Army in the late 1960s.
Were you in Tampa?
I was stationed at U.S. Army Missile Command, Alabama, North Alabama, and what is now my wife of 41 years as of Sunday.
Oh, wow.
Connie and I were dating at the time, and we went down to Panama City Beach,
right,
Florida, and which we frequently did over the 4th of July weekend in 1969. And coming back from Panama City Beach, we had an individual who was drunk and driving and went through a stop sign and clipped us. And completely destroyed our vehicle and rolled us down an embankment.
Wow!
But the point is, George, that began a series of problems, muscle and nerve and spinal cord for me throughout my lifetime. And usually stress would trigger a relapse of these symptoms, and that's what took me to the Mind and Body Clinic primarily. But also because I was in a high-stress job most of my adult life. I worked for the Department of Defense. And
right,
like so many of us that are in these pressure cooker jobs in engineering and science and so on, you know, when we come home, we uncork the bottle, and I was no exception. I was a two-fisted beer drinker most of my adult life, and for about 35 of those last 40 years. Well, a couple years ago I quit. I just decided that that was that. I really wanted to find another option. So I started taking amino acids and nutrients, and it got my system very, very clean, perhaps too clean and perhaps too fast. It's amazing, but there's a huge difference between being toxic and kind of feeling okay and then really getting your system clean. I mean, with organic foods and clean water and doing everything right. I dropped about 70 pounds
wow,
over a couple-year period. But,
right.
But the point is that I found this neck relapsing due to a stress incident and with my grandchildren, actually. And over about a 3-month period, it became so severe I simply couldn't function. The pain was off the scale. I went through the allopathic system here in Spokane, Washington. I mean, I went through the MDs and the chiropractors and the acupuncturists and so on and so forth. They all added of something of value to my pain management, but I realized that I really needed to hotwire, so to speak, this neurotransmitter circuit, the immune system, and see if I couldn't trigger a spontaneous remission from this pain. So that's what I contacted the founder of Mind and Body Works, Steve Sewell, who, again,
right.
I had chatted with on Facebook about a year ago, and we had a brief conversation, and he said, John, you know, basically we can give this a try, and you're welcome to start next Wednesday. We have a session starting down here in Durango if you could make it. Well, we pulled out all stops. My wife, Connie, and I works for Spokane Community College. She went on leave, medical leave for me, and we went to Durango. And so I was hooked up to an IV for the morning hours of 10 days, but very intense work, too, shamanic work, spiritual work, counseling, acupuncture, massage therapy. Just some of the very, very best people are connected with the Mind and Body Works Clinic in Durango. So there's kind of a rough overview, George, of what got me there and what we did.
Well, that's very interesting. They have there's a woman there is she Native American who does the shaman?
Marie Redfeather. She is
right.
Actually from the East Coast, from the if I remember Marie's story, I think she's from the New York or New Jersey area, but somewhere in that region, and of Canadian descent, but has studied Peruvian shamanism, and she is very skilled. And I had some very powerful experiences, shamanic experiences with her techniques. highly recommend Marie Redfeather.
Well, one of the things I've been in, I gave up booze and drugs about 28 years ago. And, part of that whole process for me has been the spiritual part of my life. And I see, you were really connected with the spiritual part of your life. I think that must have had a huge impact on your quitting, along with the amino acid therapy and all of that.
Well, it absolutely did, George. There's no doubt about it. And what really came into focus a couple, 3 years ago for me was when I started my interviews with near-death experiencers back in the late 80s, early 90s, started talking with folks who had been clinically dead and who had some powerful experiences with respect to those of us who had not cleaned our systems up. And there was no penalty per se, except that we didn't really get over our addictions when we came out of body. And I started to look into that and investigate the idea that was shared with me that our DNA is immortal. The DNA that we have in our body also is a crystal, a liquid crystal. You can think of it as a computer chip that actually is in the space around us as well. In other words, think about it this way. DNA is in the air we breathe and the water we drink and the soil we get our food from, as well as our physical body.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, this is shamanic. This is the work of an anthropologist, Dr. Jeremy Narby, who wrote the book, The Cosmic Serpent Dna and the Origins of Knowledge. It was quite a shock to this young man, too, when he was getting his doctorate at Stanford. He went down to Brazil and took part of the ayahuasca ceremonies and realized that DNA was everywhere in the jungle. I mean, it was in the air or the water, the soil, the plants. And, of course, the shamans will tell you that these plant teachers, like ayahuasca, are where they get their information to find the plants that actually heal us. And the reason that works, of course, is because DNA is an intelligent being in and of itself. It's running the show 24/7, and not only here but hereafter, evidently. And then I found a near-death experiencer, Mellon Thomas Benedict, who actually confirmed this to me years ago, that DNA indeed survives death, and it crystallizes back into what we call the vacuum of space, the zero-point field. Well, I'm an engineer by profession and scientist, so I worked with that idea for a couple decades, and now I'm very comfortable with it. But that's the point, George, that it's important we clean our systems up here, because these addictions tend to drag us down on the other side. We basically lose our ability to think through them if we don't clean our systems up. They kind of take over. I mean, if you think a craving can control you now on, say, methamphetamine or alcohol or tobacco, can you imagine if you don't have a heavy filtering system in place like the body? So when you lose the body, you lose the filter. When you lose the filter, it comes at you head on and basically consumes you.
Wow, that really makes sense, because you're in a much finer ether than we are here in this earth plane, huh?
That's right.
Yeah, wow, that's very interesting. So let's talk then about your near-death experience and your physicist friend or mentor or teacher. Well, before we do that, I have one question. Do you, in order to become a real shaman, where you really you've really got it, you're not just reading about it, you're experiencing the whole process. Is it going to take some kind of a plant teacher? Is it going to take psilocybin or ayahuasca to really get to that space?
It really depends on the individual. I've had some profound metaphysical experiences since childhood. It's quite clear to me that there's many factors involved. There are some shamans that do not use the plant teachers, but as a rule, that kind of goes. That's kind of the toolkit that they use to get into that space under a controlled environment. That's what they use to shift into that state of consciousness on a regular basis as needed. But there are shamans who can do that through trance, and there are many rituals that will take you into that space. But there is a qualitative difference between in my opinion, between getting there with a plant teacher, because this is a plant teacher. You're dealing with another level of intelligence that is mentoring you, no doubt about it. So
Right.
my experiences, which are non-drug related per se, in other words, I have not participated in these ceremonies, but I have had profound mystical experiences throughout my life since basically grade school that told me that there is intelligence immediately upon shifting into the trance state. You can contact or be contacted by this higher level of intelligence, and I assume lower level. I have not been bothered with the lower level intelligences, but I'm quite certain they're there.
Oh, I'm sure they are there. So you was it because of the previous addiction that you decided not to use the plant teachers, or was there a specific reason that?
I may use the plant teachers in the future. That would depend on a lot of factors, but I basically am a scientist, so I wanted to use myself as a control subject. In other words, I wanted to be able to say, I came to these conclusions without being under the influence of something. You know what I mean?
Yes.
If someone challenged me, like another scientist said, well, you kind of bought the farm here, my friend. You're taking a drug now, and you've befriended the drug. I wanted to be able to say, actually that's not the case. I've looked at this very objectively and clinically. I did not throw away my brain to investigate shamanism or the spiritual world. I'm here to say that I came to the same conclusions that those who have used the plant teachers.
Well, one of the things, John, that one of the many things that impressed me about you and your work is the fact that you are a scientist. So you come at this with not only the deep, high spiritual viewpoint, but also that scientist's inquisitive nature, and wanting it to be tested and tried and true, and that's very, very positive.
Well, I think what we're talking about, George, is that the whole genre of mystics, prophets, and shamans is entering a new phase of development. We are basically the new spiritual scientist, or what I call the science of soul, is emerging now. And so I just see me as a forerunner of what is coming into this planet as the next generation of investigators into a multidimensional holographic universe. So we're simply, like I say, we're the scouts. We're just advanced scouts that are giving some credibility from the scientific community to these investigations. And there are so many of us now. It's a long, distinguished list, and I'm not one of them. But certainly we have people like Dr. Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona doing incredible work, and of course Ken Ring when he was on the faculty at the University of Connecticut with near-death experiences, and so on and so forth. There are so many now that it's just a matter of time before this is integrated into the curriculum of the scientific
Oh, really? That's very
academic
interesting.
community. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
sure.
that's very interesting. Well, I think, do you think that maybe the quantum physics and our knowledge there has kind of helped put this together, where the attitude is even a bit receptive to that?
Well, there's two factors. One is just sheer volume. The people crying in the wilderness that this is true
Right.
is now reaching a fever pitch, and we are also at a crossroads in our evolution where the brain is being understood, more deeply through MRI and scans, etc., that can actually track a thought and what that does, and a feeling and what that does. So when we get down to thoughts and feelings, we're working in that ethereal realm, as you said, the zero-point field of physics.
Right.
So the field is what we're talking about. This space that we're in is intelligent. We're embedded, you might say, within the zero-point field. We are the zero-point field. And folks like Dr. Bruce Lipton, cell biologist, and Greg Braden, and so on and so forth, these folks have very solid academic credentials as well. And, they basically sacrificed their career in the mainstream to bring this information to the world. I know them personally, and I know what they did to get where they're at. And
Right.
It's a long, hard slog. And
I'm sure. I'll tell you that the Biology of Belief, what a powerful book that was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Bruce Lipton and I used to have very long conversations on the phone back in the early years, and
Uh-huh.
and I helped sponsor him a time or two to come to Spokane and speak here, and Greg Braden and others like him, and I've been with Daniel Brinkley and some of the near-death experience community over in Seattle, that finally became well-known, Betty Eady and Kimberly Clark Sharp and all those. But I got my start with a gal by the name of Laura Lee in Seattle, who had a little radio show in Seattle, and who really brought all of us that I've just mentioned. She was the one that
Brought it all together, huh?
Brought us all together, brought us to her home, brought her to her studio, spent time with us, and really gave us our start in talk radio.
Well, when you were talking about the field being the thing, is Rupert Sheldrake's work, how does that fit into all this? Is he?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Lynn McTaggart, who wrote the book, The Field. Rupert Sheldrake, for those of our audience who aren't familiar, is an individual who has made a profound theory understandable, and it's basically that morphogenetic fields, meaning fields that give form and shape to matter, are all around us. They are the higher level of intelligence that the shamans work with. They realize that thoughts are things, and feelings empower those thoughts, and so these fields that give shape to reality are what Rupert Sheldrake has experimented with most of his career, with plants and animals and humans.
Right.
And he's concluded, that this field of intelligence, the 0-point field we say in the vacuum of space and physics, is the mind of God.
And I'm quite sure that that's true, huh? It's probably as close as we're going to get, anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got to put a label to it, I mean, it's beyond name and forms according to the mystics, but this super intelligence that has given shape to everything and continually feeds new information to us so that we are creative and can become co-creators of reality is what we're really getting down now to understand is our calling. Our calling is as stewards of the environment. We are to be integrated more naturally into the environment again. I mean, we came from the environment. We're going back into the environment. It was just a slice of, history, you might say, the last 150 years or so of technology and science, where basically we got outside of science. We became, outside of nature. We felt that we had to control nature and that we had to be so objective that we could not feel our way into this space that we're in as investigators of it. And we found out that's false, that as we observe a space, we change it, we become part of the experiment. And that's what quantum physics says. That's the
Absolutely.
theorem of non-locality and so on and so forth. There's a lot of books and DVDs on this, and YouTube is certainly full of information for our audience to review.
Well, I've traveled this mystic path for well over 30 years now, and it's without the feeling nature, I don't I think we have to get into that feeling nature and get past the mental construct that just blocks so much of this stuff out. We look for proof in kind of hard, fast ways that just aren't available once you start to move into that realm. The proof is there, but it's not concrete like science likes to have it, or has.
Well, actually, what we're getting down to, George, is the truth that feelings are facts, and that feeling is the true nature of the universe.
Yes.
We got ourselves in trouble when we started making statements that animals that we were using on our experiments didn't feel pain, that plants that we chopped down in forests that we clear-cut and so on didn't have any impact on our health. So we're in a whole deep hole right now that we're trying to, you might say, dig our way paradoxically out of, and it's going to be through feeling. And feeling is the highest vibration of intelligence, and we really need to get back to this idea of a sixth sense, of intuition. And as you're saying, too, this is where we're going in the future. We are really being called, as Dr. Ken Ring had said, we're looking at the shamanizing of humanity.
Well, that's an interesting point, the shamanizing of humanity. I'm sure that's what's happening, but what, like when you look at the history of shamanism, a tribe would have a shaman, and he did for the whole tribe. So are we at a place now where we all need to become shamans, or can we have surrogates, or how do you see that?
We're all becoming initiated now into the role of the shaman. The shaman is the individual who can work multidimensionally. Our third eye is opening, the pineal gland, for example.
Absolutely.
That really is what we're referencing here when we talk about shamanism. We're talking about a way to open the pineal gland, the flow of DMT, dimethyltryptamine. Dimethyltryptamine is the active hallucinogenic compound that's in ayahuasca, for example. It's in the sacred mushroom, and all of your substances that are used by the shaman in some way or form are working with the pineal gland. The evidence now is overwhelming, as Dr. Rick Strassman, a psychiatrist at the University of New Mexico, has said, for DMT to be the spirit molecule. In fact, that was the name of his book, DMT, the spirit molecule. And the work he did with, I think it was about 400 subjects or so, at the University of New Mexico back in the 90s. And he realized that we are now entering into a new era of science, spirit, and integrating this knowledge of the shaman into the mainstream. But I think the point I'd like to make is, because of Earth changes, because of climate change, because of all the things we hear associated with 2012, we are all being tasked with becoming our own initiated shamans. And what I mean is that all you have to do is get your system cleaned up and start looking into these ideas and feeling your way into them. You'll sense there's so much more to the body. The body is an incredibly sensitive instrument, and it can pick up all this information if your system is clean. So again, we're getting back to, why would someone want to use amino acids, for example, to get their system tuned up? It's because that's where we're going, and we can either go there, on a controlled, manageable level, or we can go kicking and screaming, but we're going there. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I absolutely am convinced of that. Well, the one of the things with that feeling your way through things is to begin to trust that part of yourself. That's a real huge fight for especially men.
It's absolutely, the heart of the problem is that we're afraid of nature. We're afraid of each other. We're afraid of God. The fear factor is what's limiting all of this from just busting wide open. And so what's going to happen is there's going to be a tension here that's even more intense than we're experiencing today. Mellon Thomas Benedict calls it the era of universal pain and suffering. And he had a clinical death experience years ago where he was clinically dead for 90 minutes. And the short of it is, he was healed spontaneously of his cancer, and he's a modern-day shaman. And what does he do with his abilities now? He creates medical technologies using low voltage light, using like light-emitting diodes, LED-type technologies. But he has several patents on these devices. But Mellon Thomas Benedict is a classic example of somebody who had a near-death experience and was initiated as a shaman and came back realizing that he could use trance or meditation to open his third eye at will. And he's done this in controlled experiments. He's been studied very heavily by scientists in his early years, and now he's taken complete control of his powers and is using them to benefit and bless his life as well as those around him. But the point is, it's up to us now to initiate ourselves, whatever that means for the person. I mean, what level are we blocking? Where are we blocked? We come from an abusive childhood? Are we addicted to drugs and alcohol? Or are we emotionally stable? Always have been? Well, you're not going to have much of a problem transitioning into this new world.
Well, you mentioned something that's, I think, is really powerful, and that is pain and suffering. I'm not sure how much change comes about with, at least with humans, without pain and suffering to, kick us down the road a bit.
There might be some, but I haven't met them either, George. I like to keep that door open so I stay optimistic when I make that statement, but there are some that seem to have sort of waltzed into this life and seem to be waltzing through it. And not stubbing their toes and banging their heads, but Yeah, it really depends on whether you can let go. I mean, and how much, if you're a control freak like I was, all scientists are control freaks. They might, they might say they're not, but that's nonsense. We're, method oriented.
That's the nature of who you are, right?
Absolutely, we're
yeah.
left brain
Yeah.
oriented, and sometimes we just don't take yes for an answer.
Yeah. God forbid I should get a positive on this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about your near-death experience, and tell us what happened for you with that, and
Well, what I've had several different experiences, but the one that was the most profound was the after-death communication from my friend George Vigay. Now,
does that still that communication is still with you? You still have that going on?
actually, that was a one-time event that just simply opened my third eye. And I was asked this question years ago, have you had other contacts with George? And I said, I've never even thought about opening that door again, and I haven't, and that's an interesting idea, and I might pursue that in the future. But
right.
but what happened to me, for folks who don't know, was in November of 1987, I was an engineer with the federal government in Huntsville, Alabama, and my friend George Vigay and I had been together a number of years by then. We served in the U.S. Army together overseas in Germany, came back, started raising our family, going to college, University of Alabama. Well, anyway, George died suddenly one Monday morning in November 1987 at age 40.
Wow.
And just had a massive heart attack, couldn't be revived. Well, I was part of that very elaborate Catholic funeral and pallbearer, and I helped lift that casket into a mausoleum there in Huntsville. And that was that. I lost my best friend. I mean, it just ripped my heart out, and I was in shock, and I was in grief, and I was just devastated by this loss. We spent a lot of time together, and when you spend time as a soldier and then as a civilian, and your wives are friends, and yet we had two daughters together. I had two girls, and my wife and I, and Kathy and George, they had two girls. So I mean, it was a pretty tight-knit little social group.
Sure.
So when George died, it just threw me for a loop, and I asked for a transfer from Alabama with the Army to work for the Navy in the Seattle area, where I grew up. So in June of 1988, I was getting resettled in a new job as an engineer with the Navy in Keyport, Washington. And one early morning, about 4 o'clock, June of 1988, I thought I was having a lucid dream of my friend George, and I had not even thought about him in weeks. I had not really, I was just real intense on getting this new job underway. But he stood there in front of me in this holographic, shimmering body, and just blew my mind. I shook my head. I thought I was in a lucid dream, and then I realized I was in the dream, and I was out of the dream, and it just shook my paradigm, my model of reality to the ground. And there was a little more to it, but basically I realized George was telling me, hey, I'm fine. Life after death exists, and I'm moving on. And there was several confirmational things said and exchanged there, information and symbols that I talk about in the first edition of my book. But the point is, George, that this was the shock that opened my third eye, and I didn't know what that meant then. I didn't even know I had a third eye.
Sure.
And so I spent many, many years in full-time research looking at near-death experience, going to Seattle to the chapter meetings with IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, when it was just really getting started a couple decades ago. And I started being a voracious reader of everything metaphysical. I had never picked up a metaphysical book in my life. I was a hard-nosed, science-oriented guy, and that was that. So that's kind of the quick overview. And that's what launched me into this new life that I want to share with people. I just, still 20-some years into this, I am just as passionate as I was then that we need to know about these things. We need to get over the fear factor, and that's what I've been working through, too. It's obvious to me that I was probably more fearful than 90% of the population about these ideas. And, this is the way it works. You teach what you need to learn, and that's probably what happened to me.
Well, that's sure been the story of my life, teaching what I need to learn. I wish I could learn it a little quicker, but sometimes
Yeah.
it's down the
Amen.
road before I even realize it. So, how does reincarnation play into your world, and how do you see this idea of reincarnation? Did you read any of the Jane Roberts work?
On Seth, yes, many, many years ago, and as part of my research, I went through about 1,000 books.
I
1,000 books. I did a bibliography one time, and it was just an encyclopedia. That's just books, and I think I hit every major book that was available to the general public, at least 2 decades ago. But
right.
reincarnation is simply a natural recycling of energy and information and matter. I mean, everything reincarnates. It's just like the four seasons. I mean, here in the Northwest, we're in the middle of starting a real snowy winter again, and everything is kind of going to sleep and being put to bed for the winter. And in the spring, it'll come back, and summer, everything will bloom again, and so on. Well, so go the seasons of our life. We need to really kind of take a deep breath and relax on this idea. Reincarnation is just a natural recycling of intelligence and matter and energy and information, and it goes on forever. There never was a beginning. There never will be an end. That is a mind blower, but again and again, near-death experiencers have shared that idea with me. And the only way that you're going to really understand it is to realize that the universe is in the shape of a bagel or a donut. It's called a torus in mathematics, right? A torus. And that torus turns through the center point. So think of a donut and just spin it through. If you could turn a donut, inside out continually, that's the real vision of the universe. And then it's nested, what we call, into hyperspheres, meaning donuts within donuts, bagels within bagels. And so that can be looked at mathematically as the model of reincarnation of everything. And there's a magnetic signature, too. There's a magnetic imprint on everything in existence. There's a what we call a signature in engineering. So you and I, we have unique DNA. We have unique fingerprints. We have unique eyes, and so on, right? So there's no two snowflakes alike. There's no two blades of grass alike. How can that be possible? Each thing is barcoded magnetically, in other words. And so reincarnation just means that everything has an order, has a season, and we come and we go, and we need to get used to that. We'll be using reincarnation in the future, by the way. We'll be planning our lifetimes. I'm doing that now by envisioning what I want to do next lifetime already. So I've got a kind of a jump start on my next life, and I don't spend a lot of time with that, but I start seeing where I could be of use next lifetime, and already, so I can see where all my skill set will continue on, and where the family I'd like to be born into. And Mellon Thomas Benedict gave me a beautiful analogy of this. He said, it's like riding a bicycle. You're gonna fall off, and you're gonna bump your head and skin your knees, but you keep trying. You'll eventually get this right. And so we're coming into a science of reincarnation. Again, I lump all this under the science of soul that I talk about.
Right.
And it's very natural. I mean, none of this is abnormal at all to me anymore. I mean, there's just a gentleness to this. There's a grace to these ideas, and we've just complicated things with our mind. And like we were talking about earlier, George, feel your way into these ideas. Just realize that nothing in this incredible would ever be lost to an intelligence that could control it, to an intelligence that is in love with life. I mean, you don't want to lose any of this. You want to re-experience it. You want to recycle it. And so that's the way reincarnation works.
One of Jane Roberts' books was Oversoul 7, where she talked about, being several different beings in different dimensions all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably pretty close.
Absolutely.
Well, the other thing, too, is, you talk about there can't be an end to energy. And energy, when I think about it, is a frequency. which and frequencies run in cycles. And so, I mean, just it kind of all makes sense that it would be this cycle thing would be hugely important to us.
Absolutely. Remember, we cannot create energy. We cannot destroy it. We can only transform it.
Right.
Right? And that's part of the title of my book, Tranceformers, although it's spelled Trance, formers, Tranceformers, because of the shamanic aspect. But trance is the unification of the left and right brain hemisphere. That's what it is, the synchronization of the hemispheres of the brain.
That's interesting. I had not heard that before. That makes really makes sense.
And what are you synchronized to? You're synchronized in trance to the Schumann resonance frequency, cavity frequency of the Earth. The Earth pulses in the 4 to 8 cycle per second realm, on average about 7. The theta brainwave in trance or hypnosis is in that 4 to 8 cycle per second range. So you're synchronizing with the intelligence of the Earth when you're in trance. There is the shamanic power. There's where the plant teachers take you. They connect you back to Mother Earth.
That makes sense. I've been working for years with theta and meditation. This is really the sweet spot in meditation for me. That's
right.
Where the most kind of things happen. So Terence McKenna did a really interesting thing around 2012 in the Mayan calendar, where he actually charted it right alongside the I Ching.
That's right, the Book of Changes.
Yeah.
Right, the I Ching.
A very, very powerful kind of thing. He one of the things he said was that schizophrenic or shamanic refers to shamans during the Paleolithic stage as sanctioned psychotics.
Well, the anthropologists that studied them originally called them schizophrenic.
Right.
And the point is because they acted completely crazy in terms of what they were used to seeing as the goal of a balanced human being. But this crazy as a fox shaman
right.
is somebody who can use the mythological realm to heal and to bring information. And it really comes from getting out of your head, getting out of the sanctioned consensus reality. And so those of us who can do that, who basically are loners, and can spend great time in nature, for example, and there's many ways to do this. You can do it through exhaustion, through physical exercise, but whatever it's fasting, whatever way you do it, you're going to find yourself highly sensitive to the environment. And speaking of Terence McKenna, remember Terence, he came up with this time wave zero, and
right.
he linked it to DNA.
Ah, that's right, huh?
Remember that?
Yes.
And the synchronization of history was literally the unfoldment of specific times that DNA allowed really us to experience. I mean, again, this is coming back to DNA is this living being of intelligence that Dr. Jeremy Narby found out about in the Amazon when he participated in shamanic ceremony. So we need to come back and realize that anything we can do to synchronize the left and right brain hemisphere, clean up our system, and allow DNA to flow through us unimpeded, that is the information, light, energy that DNA operates on, the biophotons, is going to allow us to enter into the shamanic realm. And so there's a science to this. There's nutritional science to this. There's all manner of insights from biology and chemistry and so on that we can use to amplify the effect and get us into these shamanic states. But again, I'm sure the plant teachers will always be part of this process for those who want to explore that realm.
Well, as a matter of fact, McKenna talked about meditation as being, a spiritual discipline. But he said to really get there, he felt that it had to be a plant teacher.
I know he did, and I think that many would agree with him. It really depends on what kind of information you're going after, too.
Oh, yeah.
If you're going after, plant information, you have to go there and make friends with this intelligence.
Right.
But if you're on the end of, say, working with a technology that still, does not require that level of information. Maybe, I mean, in other words, you assemble a team, and some are going into inner space, and some are working in outer space.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
And so I think Stan Groff has got it right. Dr. Stan Groff, who's a MD and psychiatrist, wrote wonderful, wonderful books on these topics. Of, are you familiar with Stan Groff?
Yes, I am. So I'm trying to think of the book I read from by him. I can't.
Well, one was on the holotropic mind.
Right.
But he has several, and I encourage everyone to it's probably stangroff.com, but or you can just Google Stan Groff, Grof, and you'll understand immediately how important this man's work is. But Stan Groff, he made the comment. He said, you don't want to go into this trance state, into this holotropic mind state, when you're the pilot of a 747 coming into land at JFK. Now that's my point too, and,
right.
and he had some profound experiences that were not related to drugs. He did a lot of research on lysergic acid diethylamide 25 and LSD 25,
right.
legal research back in the Maryland Psychiatric Institute years ago. However, Stan really had some of his profound experiences too that come to mind. One was simply when he was going through a medical exam where the ophthalmologist shined a bright light into his eyes, and he was catapulted out of his body.
Wow.
And the other one was when he met a mystic in San Francisco, Muktananda, and his wife had studied meditation under, and simply, had what they call Shaktipat, where literally the Shri, the master, just tapped him on the forehead over the third eye, and the next thing he was orbiting, Alpha Centauri. So, I mean, you don't have to, like I say, get locked into one or the other. It's both and. It's both and. We both want to use the plant teachers, and we want to use controls that don't need or don't want to be involved in that level of activity. I see, there's room for everybody in this.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And because of our diversity, there needs to be, some way for all of us to travel this path. Well, one of my teachers was Carlos Castaneda, which was definitely a plant,
absolutely,
shaman. And it's
yes.
I couldn't wait for his next work to come out. It was like, and I'll tell you what, that work still bubbles up in me in different ways, even today. It's like something I didn't understand then, and it'll come back where I do now.
Sure.
And so, how about the double or the doppelganger or astral body, soul retrieval? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, basically what we are is a multidimensional being of light right now. There's many parts to us. I mean, it doesn't matter what level or layer. We just think of ourselves as an onion. We got many layers to us. These are energy and information and memory fields. These are these morphogenetic fields that Rupert Sheldrake talks about. These are the chakras.
Are they archetypes? Is that what we're talking?
Yes, the archetypes could be one way. Archetype just meaning a consistent idea that is held in our minds, that has a symbol related to it. But the point is that if we realize that everywhere we go, when we invest in emotion, for example, into a conversation, we're leaving a little part of ourselves there. We really are.
Yeah.
And this is something that we're going to need to understand more, is that we impregnate space that we're in. We give it an energetic signature. This is where magnetism comes in. We actually charge the space we're in. We do this with water. We're, basically 70 to 90% water. The brain is somewhere in the area of 75% water. At birth, we're about 90% water. As adult, maybe 70%, depends. But the point is that we have done a lot of research now with water. And water, the water that's here now was here in the beginning of the creation of the earth. The same amount of water, the same air, for example, is also, the oxygen, all these molecules, they're reconfigured in different densities and different concentrations, but the basic elements are here now. They were here in the beginning, and they're here now, and we keep recycling them through us. So what are we? We're just energy transformer right now. We bring in air. We're bringing in DNA now with each breath. We're bringing in the water vapor. We're bringing, we use this line, we're breathing a molecule right now that Buddha breathed, that Jesus breathed, and so on, that Albert Einstein, So we are not, these isolated capsules, these self-encapsulated egos that Ellen Watts, I believe, used that term. We really are not self-encapsulated. We are a multidimensional energy unit of consciousness that's continually processing all the elements of the periodic table and then some, and we are transforming them each and every moment. We're putting our imprint on them, our signature. So as we walk through space and time, and as we interact with one another and the environment, we're leaving a part of ourselves. So this idea of soul retrieval is simply that. If you expend yourself unwisely through many different ways, but you simply out of balance, you're out of control. You're
Especially,
always angry, for example.
That's negative
you're just
emotions,
spraying your energy all over the place, and you're losing part of yourself. You're becoming fragmented. So the shaman is someone that will get you reintegrated and centered. And so the idea is centering. So we have centering prayer and centering meditation. We walk the labyrinth, right?
Right.
That was big in the early Christian cathedrals, in Chartres Cathedral. I do this here at St. John's Cathedral in Spokane. I walk about a mile from my house. There's a labyrinth put down on one of the main side wings of this huge cathedral, and I'll be there sometimes all by myself walking that labyrinth. And right there on the sign by that labyrinth, it says, "This is one way the early Christians said they could rebalance their brain." Well, bingo. I mean, that's what we're talking about with amino acid therapy. We're talking about with meditation, with prayer, what we're talking about with shamanic ritual and trance states. We're trying to integrate the left and right hemisphere of the brain. That is, pull back the information, energy, and memory and become a whole brain individual. Now, the big point here, George, before we run out of time, I want everyone to realize you're sitting on a planet spinning at 1,000 miles an hour on its axis. Basically takes 24 hours to go through the day-night cycle. And so we have a northern hemisphere and a southern hemisphere, an eastern and a western. That quadrant, that dividing line at the equator is equivalent to the way we partition our brain, our left and right hemisphere of our brain, and the frontal lobe and then the back. So there is a global brain, and it's run by the north and south pole. The electromagnetic fields of the Earth go through the center of the Earth, the core of the Earth, a huge energy transformer at the core of the Earth, again resonating with the theta brainwave of our brain. And so what is the big deal about 2012? More than anything else, it's about the fact that the Earth is becoming centered through the sun with the center of the Milky Way galaxy, with this rift that's called the Great or Dark Rift. That's the origin of our solar system. That part of space, which is around the Orion constellation in the southern night sky, if you're in the northern hemisphere, that was what the pyramids were tuned to. They were resonating with that starlight, with that energy and that information and intelligence that's coming from those particular stars, and they were absorbing it in the stone, in the pyramids. The tetrahedral geometry, those four-sided pyramids called tetrahedrons,
right,
are basically what we are. We run on tetrahedral technology too, sacred geometry based on the phi ratio. Now, I know this is a lot of information coming hard and fast, but we need to see that we are an integral part of this cosmos. We're not haphazardly thrown here for some unknown reason. This is nonsense. We are absolutely the highest level of intelligence currently walking on 2 feet on this planet, and we are called to regroup and to regather our resources and to stop polluting ourselves and the planet and get smart about everything again. Well, the ancients obviously knew this, and they built these technologies like the pyramids and Stonehenge. And remember, they're in a circle, everything, the sacred circle. In the Native American community, it's the hoop, right? The sacred hoop. And so we're mending the sacred hoop again. And what we're really doing is trying to put ourselves in the center of the cosmos again, into the center of it, not on that fringe of it, not as some kind of haphazard quirk of evolution, but we were designed by the sun and by the galaxy and by the Earth to be here to raise up this level of intelligence and use it as stewards and co-creators to restore the environment, to keep the environment pristine. That's the beauty of the human being. We can see that we are part of this system and feel integrated into nature again.
Well, yeah, Greg Braden brings up some interesting points about kind of what you're talking about with his fractal time and how it comes back and the energy's increased and things are stronger at this point.
Absolutely. Greg is correct. And remember, Bruce Lipton's book, After Biology of Belief, was fractal evolution.
Exactly. Yeah.
So fractal geometry is what we're talking about. That's the phi ratio, too. The golden mean is a fractal. And then think of a nautilus shell or a sunflower. Those are all phi ratio geometries, and we are built on that double helix, which is a phi ratio as well.
So we're actually coming into the reality of the fifth dimension.
That's right. And the fifth dimension, for those who don't understand that, again, let's go back to the torus real quick. I know we're running out of time here, George, but
we're close. But go right ahead.
The torus, or this bagel or donut. Remember, we're on the outside of this donut. We're on the outer surface. Well, to the center of that donut, as you turn into it, would be the fifth dimension. The physical torus, this shape of a donut, would be 3 dimensions. And now if you're rotating it, though, say clockwise, we'll just use the term clockwise, we're going through space clockwise on this sphere, this donut. That would be the 4th dimension of time. So you've got a 3-dimensional object in movement. That's the 4th dimension. The 5th dimension is going to the center. So that's why, again, centering prayer, centering ritual, meditation, trance. They're taking you to the center point of where the information is flowing through the center of the universe, through the center of the galaxy, through the center of the sun, through the center of the earth. And so we want to be centered, left and right hemispheres of the brain. We want to be in balance so we can get in the flow of that 5th dimensional center point of cosmic consciousness.
You know, what's interesting is you used the word balance. You know, when I first got involved with spirituality, one of the things I would hear was, like the need for balance. And it just, that never really connected with me as far as the spiritual path. But the longer I'm around this, the more I realize just how important that really is.
It is, and we always have to take ourselves and reference where we're at. Now, with Google Earth, for example, I can literally get a satellite eye view of the Earth in my mind's eye. I can I can project myself into space now with that technology, and I can look back. And I lived in Nuremberg, Germany. I can literally be there in my mind's eye when I want to. I've lived in Florida and throughout the Southeast and the West Coast and so on. I can go to these places now. I can be, in my mind's eye, I can be in Durango, Colorado, where I was a couple months ago. I can be in Melbourne, Florida, where I went to graduate school at Florida Tech, and so on. I can be in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. But the point is that ability to look down, to observe, is very important. And that's the shamanic sense, again, of how integrated we are into the environment. When everybody can do that, we are going to be so blessed with information and new technologies. It's just going to be an amazing time, George, to be here and see the creativity just explode exponentially.
Well, like the Chinese said, we are blessed to have been born in interesting times, for sure.
Yes, that's correct.
Listen, you've been just a wonderful guest. I loved having you on, and I definitely will want to have you back if you're at some point in the future, if you're up for that.
That'd be wonderful.
And, I'll tell you what, we got to about 20% of what I wanted to talk with you about.
That's pretty good.
Not bad, really. We
got to about 5% of what I wanted to talk about.
I bet. Well, you know what we'll have to do? We'll have to put our heads together before the next time, and we'll make a little plan so we can get things really...
That's a good idea. Yeah, let's do some bulleting of some key points.
Yeah.
And I'd like to share with folks, what's coming in the future, in terms of Earth changes, how I see those unfolding over the next 30 years, basically into about 2036. But also there's going to be some key things coming up here in 2012, 13, 14 with the stars, and there's going to be some meteor showers. There's going to be some wonderful, fireworks in the sky for us to look at. So there's going to be some things to talk about.
Hey, one last thing. I forget where I saw it, but are you friends with Hank Wesselman, or how was he connected with what you...
I know who he is and his books and all that, but the only thing, we probably were both interviewed by some people video. You probably saw maybe us
that
together with Conscious Media Network, for example.
That could be. He was on our show, and he just was a really interesting, good guy.
Yeah, oh, no, he is. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, good guy.
Absolutely phenomenal. Vision Seekers, one of his books. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, we are totally out of time. Thank you so much for spending the evening with us, and we'll talk, get you back after the first of the year.
That's great, George. God bless and happy holidays to everyone.
You too, John. Thank you much now. Bye-bye.
Good.
What a great guest, huh, Tom? I just, he has got more knowledge bubbling out of him than 5 of a lot of authors out there. And I really like the fact that he's out there on a day-to-day basis, putting this information out and working at making people aware that we don't have to be victimized by any of this stuff, that we have an opportunity for our voice to count and to actually make some positive transformations. Good guy. I really appreciate having the evening with him. I've got a great guest next week. I'm out of time, can't tell you about her, but we'll be posting something up on the website, so take a look and be sure and come back next week. It's going to be a really interesting time. And in the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week.